Among all the places where he suffered, none was darker than Venafro, not because of what could be seen, but because of what could not. It was here, in this silent monastery, surrounded by cold mountain winds, that a young friar, barely in his 20s, began to face a darkness no human eyes were meant to witness. Padre Pio was still fragile in body, often weakened by illness, still learning the weight of his vocation. Yet it was precisely at this moment of weakness that the invisible war began. The nights in Venafro were long, too long. The corridors were empty, the lamps flickered, and in the deep hours before dawn, when even prayers seemed to echo into silence, something else started to move. Years later, people would ask, what really happened to Padre Pio when he was only in his 20s? Was it exhaustion, hallucination, or was it something far more terrifying? Because this is not merely a story about the devil's cruelty. This is a story about faith being tested at its breaking point, about a soul chosen not for comfort, but for battle, and about a young priest who learned far too early that holiness often walks straight through darkness. In Venafro, Padre Pio did not simply suffer. He entered a war that would shape the rest of his life, a war no one could see, but heaven and hell both witnessed. Before we continue, I invite you to pause, not just as a viewer, but as a soul. In the comments below, write a short prayer. It can be for the souls who are suffering and forgotten, or it can be a prayer for yourself, for strength, healing, and protection in the year 2026. Let this not be only a story you watch, but a moment where your words become a light in the darkness. When Padre Pio arrived in Venafro, he was barely past his 20th year. To the world, he looked like nothing more than a fragile young friar, thin, pale, often trembling from illness. His body seemed too weak to carry the weight of the life he had chosen. Many wondered how such a delicate man could survive the rigors of religious discipline, let alone the unseen battles of the soul. But beneath that fragile exterior lived a spirit of uncommon fire. Even in his youth, Padre Pio was known for his deep silence, his long hours of prayer, and a devotion that went far beyond obligation. While others rested, he knelt. While others slept, he whispered prayers into the darkness. It was as if he already sensed that his life would not be one of comfort, but of combat. At first, the signs were subtle. A sudden heaviness in the air during prayer, a coldness that would fall over his cell without warning, an unexplainable fear that crept into his heart during the quietest hours of the night. Then came the disturbances. Strange noises echoed through the monastery corridors when no one was there. Objects seemed to move without touch. Padre Pio began waking with bruises he could not explain, marks that did not belong to illness, but to struggle. He spoke little of these things, not out of doubt, but out of humility. Yet the changes in him could not remain hidden for long. Father Agostino, his spiritual director, was among the first to notice. He saw how the young friar's face grew more serious, how his eyes carried a depth that no man of his age should have known. Concerned, he began asking questions. And when Padre Pio finally opened his heart, Father Agostino did something that would later become invaluable. He began to write. Night after night, he recorded what Padre Pio experienced, the fears, the visions, the physical pain, and the strange presence that seemed to surround him. At first, even Father Agostino struggled to understand what he was witnessing. But one thing became clear. This was no ordinary suffering. Something had noticed the young friar, and something had decided to challenge him. Venafro, once merely a quiet place of formation, was becoming the stage for a battle that would mark Padre Pio's soul forever. A storm of darkness that had only just begun. What began as isolated disturbances soon became a relentless siege. For nearly 40 days, Venafro was no longer a place of quiet formation, but a battlefield hidden from human eyes. Each night seemed heavier than the last, as if the darkness itself had learned to wait for Padre Pio. Sleep abandoned him. When the monastery fell silent and the lamps dimmed, strange sounds would rise in the corridors, footsteps where no one walked, whispers where no one spoke. At times, sharp knocks echoed against the walls of his cell, sudden and violent, leaving his heart pounding in the darkness. Other nights it was worse, a suffocating presence that made him feel watched, surrounded, hunted. Padre Pio later confessed that the attacks were not only against his body, but against his soul. His strength would drain without reason. During prayer, a crushing weight pressed upon his chest, making every breath feel like a battle. Thoughts of despair tried to invade his mind, whispering that his suffering was meaningless, that God had turned his face away. It was a war not of blades, but of lies, and lies are often the most dangerous weapons of all. He endured in silence as long as he could, but the changes in him became impossible to hide. Father Agostino saw it first in his eyes. The young friar who once carried a gentle calm now bore a deep, weary gravity. His voice grew softer. His gaze drifted often into distance, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Some mornings he appeared exhausted beyond explanation, his hands trembling as he held his rosary. Concern turned into alarm. One night, Father Agostino witnessed Padre Pio stumble from his cell, pale and shaken, his habit disordered as though he had been struggling with an unseen force. When asked what had happened, the young friar hesitated, then finally whispered words that chilled the priest's soul. "They come at night, not only to hurt me, but to make me doubt." From that moment on, Father Agostino no longer dismissed what he was seeing as weakness or illness. He understood that something far darker was at work. And so he continued his quiet vigil, watching, praying, and writing, recording every sign, every change, every terrifying detail. The 40 days passed like a long descent into shadow. Yet through every assault, Padre Pio remained on his knees, and in that fragile young body, an unbreakable spirit was being forged in fire. The attacks at Venafro had already stripped Padre Pio of sleep and peace, but what came next would test something far more fragile than his body. One night, as he knelt alone in his cell, exhausted from prayer and struggle, the darkness suddenly changed. The air grew warm. The cold heaviness that usually pressed upon his chest lifted, and then light appeared. Not the harsh, blinding light of fear, but a gentle glow, soft as dawn, filling the small room with a quiet beauty. From within that radiance emerged a figure every Catholic heart longs to see, the Virgin Mary. She stood before him clothed in serenity, her face tender, her presence calm beyond words. Her voice, when she spoke, was like a mother's whisper, full of comfort, full of peace. "My son," she said softly, "you have suffered enough." For a moment, Padre Pio's heart almost broke, not from terror, but from relief. After weeks of torment, here was consolation. After endless darkness, here was light. Everything his eyes saw told him this was holy. Everything his ears heard told him he was safe. But something else spoke within him, and it did not speak in words. It spoke in cold. deep in his soul, Padre Pio felt a sudden chill, sharp and unmistakable, not the cold of the night air, but the cold of warning. A silent alarm rang inside his heart, telling him that what appeared holy did not feel holy. The struggle began. Before him stood the image of the Blessed Mother. Within him rose the instinct of spiritual discernment. Which should he trust, his sight or his soul? The figure stepped closer. The light grew brighter. The voice grew sweeter. "You are chosen," she said. "You have fought enough. You may rest now." But Padre Pio knew the truth of his calling. God never called him to comfort. God called him to fidelity. With trembling lips, he whispered the holy name of Jesus. Then, gathering every ounce of courage left in his weakened body, he spoke again, this time calling upon the real Virgin Mary, not the one before his eyes, but the one he had loved and honored in prayer since childhood. And in that moment, the light changed. The warmth vanished. The sweetness in the voice cracked. The peace in the room shattered like glass. The beautiful image before him twisted, not in form, but in presence. What had felt gentle now felt violent. What had seemed maternal now radiated hatred. Padre Pio fell to his knees, not in fear, but in victory. For he understood then a terrible truth. Evil had learned to wear a holy face. And if the devil could disguise himself as the Mother of God, then the greatest battle was no longer against terror, but against deception. That night in Venafro, Padre Pio learned that faith is not proven by what the eyes see, but what the soul dares to trust when everything else feels holy and is not. If fear had failed to break him, deception would try a different path. The devil did not return to Padre Pio in violence. He returned in mercy. After the terrifying night when evil revealed its disguise, the young friar expected the attacks to grow harsher. Instead, something far more dangerous came, a gentler voice, a softer presence, and words that sounded like compassion. "You have suffered enough." They came not as threats, but as comfort, not as screams, but as whispers that slipped quietly into his exhausted mind. In the stillness of prayer, in the moments when his strength was at its lowest, the thought would return again and again. Why must you endure this? Why must your life be so heavy? Surely God does not want you to suffer like this. The greatest danger was not in what the words said, but in how true they sounded. Because Padre Pio had suffered. His body was weak, his nights were sleepless, his soul was weary. And when pain lasts too long, even a holy heart can begin to long for rest. That was the moment Satan aimed for. Not when Padre Pio was strong in prayer, not when he stood firm in certainty, but when he was tired, when his spirit leaned just slightly toward relief. "You have done enough," the voice whispered. "You are chosen. God understands. You may stop fighting." For a heartbeat, doubt entered. Not doubt in God, but doubt in the need to continue suffering. Padre Pio later admitted that this was the closest he ever came to surrender, not to evil itself, but to the temptation of escape, to the idea that holiness might mean peace instead of perseverance. But in that fragile moment, grace intervened. He remembered the words of Christ, "Whoever wishes to follow me must take up his cross." And suddenly he understood the strategy before him. The devil no longer tried to frighten him away from God. He tried to comfort him away from the cross. With tears in his eyes, Padre Pio knelt and prayed, not for the suffering to end, but for the strength to endure it. He asked not for release, but for fidelity. And as he did, the false comfort faded. The whispers dissolved. The illusion of mercy vanished. and in their place returned the familiar silence, heavy but honest. That night, Padre Pio learned a lesson that would shape the rest of his life. The most dangerous temptation is not hatred, it is relief offered without truth. For Satan's finest weapon is not terror, but compassion without God. And in Venafro, the young friar stood victorious, not because he felt strong, but because he chose faith even when surrender felt kinder. If Padre Pio carried the battle in his soul, Father Agostino carried it in ink. Night after night, when the monastery finally fell silent, the priest would sit alone by candlelight and write. What began as simple observations soon turned into pages filled with fear, not for himself, but for the young friar entrusted to his care. His journal would later become one of the most chilling testimonies of what happened in Venafro. He wrote of mornings when Padre Pio appeared with bruises that no illness could explain, dark marks on his arms, scratches on his neck, once even blood on his pillow. When asked what had happened, the young friar answered only with lowered eyes and a quiet voice, "They come at night." In one entry, Father Agostino described hearing sudden thuds echoing from Padre Pio's cell, the sound of a body being thrown against the wall. Another night, he found the door open and the room in disarray, as if a violent struggle had taken place with an enemy no one could see. But the most terrifying moments were not the physical signs. They were the words Padre Pio whispered afterward. "They drag me from my bed. They threaten me in the darkness. They tell me I will never be free." And yet, in the same pages where Father Agostino recorded these horrors, he also wrote something else, something even more powerful. He wrote of a friar who, after being beaten in the night, rose before dawn to pray, of a man who, after being threatened by voices of hatred, knelt in silence and whispered the names of Jesus and Mary with trembling devotion. One entry reads simply, "He suffers like a martyr, but prays like a saint." Father Agostino watched as Padre Pio's body grew weaker, but his surrender to God grew stronger. There were no cries for revenge, no demands for relief, only a deeper abandonment into the will of God. When asked once how he could endure such torment, Padre Pio answered with words that Father Agostino underlined in his journal. "I belong to God. If He allows this, then He will also give me the strength to bear it." Those pages, written in fear and faith, stand today as silent witnesses to an unseen war. A war where fists struck in darkness, but prayer answered in light. For in Venafro, while evil tried to break a young friar's body, it only succeeded in proving the power of a soul that refused to let go of God. There comes a moment in every unseen war when deception can no longer hold its mask. For Padre Pio, that moment arrived on a night darker than all the others. He was kneeling in his cell, exhausted beyond words, when the familiar presence returned. Once again, the soft glow filled the room. Once again, the gentle voice spoke, calm, tender, almost loving. But this time, Padre Pio did not answer with his eyes. He answered with his faith. Gathering what little strength remained in his weakened body, he lifted his trembling hands and cried out, not to the image before him, but to the true Mother of God. "Blessed Virgin Mary," he whispered, "if you are truly here, protect me." The room fell silent. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the light began to fade, not gently, not slowly, but violently, as if ripped away by an unseen force. The warmth vanished, replaced by a sudden suffocating cold. The peaceful glow collapsed into shadow, and in that shadow, the presence changed. What had stood before him no longer felt holy, no longer felt gentle, no longer felt safe. And then it revealed itself. Not in a form the eyes could fully describe, but in a presence the soul could never forget. The sweetness in the voice turned into a low, guttural growl. The calm words became threats, whispered through clenched hatred. "You dare call her name," the voice snarled. Padre Pio fell to his knees, not in terror, but in prayer. In that single moment, the truth stood naked in the darkness. There was no more disguise, no more false light, no more borrowed holiness, only the raw presence of evil, exposed and enraged. The air felt heavy, as if the very walls of the cell trembled. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The darkness withdrew, the presence vanished, and silence returned, thick, sacred, and still. Padre Pio remained on the floor long after, his hands clasped, his heart pounding. He had seen what no man ever wishes to see, not with his eyes, but with his soul. That night in Venafro marked the turning point, for the devil had revealed himself, and in doing so, he had lost his greatest weapon, deception. From that moment on, Padre Pio no longer feared what came in the darkness. He had faced the truth, and once truth stands in the light, even hell itself begins to tremble. After the terror, after the deception, one question remained, heavier than all the others. Why would God allow this? Why would a young friar, devoted and obedient, be permitted to endure such darkness? Why would heaven seem silent while hell raged so fiercely around one fragile soul? Father Agostino asked it in prayer, Padre Pio asked it in tears, and countless souls would ask it again after hearing their story. The answer, though painful, lies deep within the mystery of divine love. In the language of faith, not all souls are asked to carry the same cross. Some are called to quiet holiness. Others are chosen for hidden battles, battles that shape not only their own salvation, but the salvation of many. The saints have always understood this truth. Those whom God draws closest to himself are often the ones tested most severely, not because he delights in their suffering, but because he trusts them with it. Padre Pio was not protected from pain. He was prepared for victory through pain. Every assault he endured sharpened his compassion for sinners. Every night of terror deepened his understanding of human weakness, and every moment of darkness carved in him a heart that would one day carry the burdens of thousands. God did not remove the cross from his shoulders, he strengthened his shoulders to carry it. In this light, Venafro was not a punishment, it was a consecration. The young friar was being formed, not in comfort, but in fire, shaped into a priest who would one day stand between heaven and earth for countless broken souls. And so the question changes, not why did God allow this, but why did God trust him with it? Because some battles are given only to those strong enough to win them, not by power, but by faith. And in the silence after the storm, Padre Pio understood he had not been abandoned. He had been chosen. Then, one day, the darkness stopped. After 40 days of unseen war, the nights in Venafro returned to silence. No more footsteps in empty corridors, no more whispers in the walls, no more sudden shadows in the corners of Padre Pio's cell. The air felt lighter, as if the monastery itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. The battle had ended, but it had not passed without leaving its mark. Padre Pio carried no visible scars that the world could see, yet within him remained wounds far deeper than the body, memories of fear, moments of loneliness, echoes of a struggle that no one else had fully witnessed. There were nights when he still woke in silence, his heart racing, his hands instinctively reaching for his rosary. And yet, something else had changed too. Where fear once lived, now stood a deeper peace. Where weakness once trembled, now stood a quiet strength. The young friar who had arrived in Venafro fragile and uncertain, now walked its halls with a new gravity. Not the weight of terror, but the weight of wisdom. He spoke less, prayed more, and carried in his eyes a gentleness shaped by suffering. Venafro was no longer a place of dread. It had become holy ground. Not because miracles were seen there, but because victory had been won there, silently, humbly, without applause. In that quiet monastery, evil had fought with all its force, and faith had answered with something stronger: endurance. The storm had passed, the scars remained, but so did something far greater, a soul refined by fire, and a holiness that could never again be shaken. The story of Venafro does not belong only to the past. It belongs to every soul listening today. Because if the devil once dared to disguise himself as the Virgin Mary, then we must understand something deeply. Evil does not always come in darkness. Sometimes it comes dressed in light. Sometimes it speaks in gentle words. Sometimes it feels almost holy. And that is why faith today matters more than ever. Not faith that lives only in words, not prayer spoken only when life is easy, but faith that stands firm when confusion comes, prayer that remains faithful when comfort would be easier. In a world filled with noise, illusions, and false peace, the lesson of Padre Pio still echoes. Only true faith and true prayer can protect the soul. As you step into 2026, remember this: every prayer you offer for a suffering soul, for a broken heart, for your own strength, is never wasted. Each one is a small light. And in a world that often feels overwhelmed by darkness, it is those small lights that keep hope alive. So, if you wrote a prayer in the comments today, know this: you did more than watch a story. You became part of a quiet victory. Just as Padre Pio once stood in the darkness of Venafro, you now stand in your own moment of choice, to let fear speak louder or to let faith shine brighter. And in that choice, heaven still listens.